entire cities, built and abandoned. Billions of dollars erased overnight. Airports that took decades to finish. Startups worth billions, collapsing in months.
Does WeWork's implosion pose a systemic risk? The company went from a $47 billion valuation to near bankruptcy in just 6 weeks.
It's here. How and what is this company going to do if it doesn't hit the public market and raise that money?
Some of the biggest projects in history didn't just fail. They became monuments. Monuments to ambition gone wrong. Because failure at this level isn't small. It's not a bad decision. It's not a missed opportunity. It's catastrophic. And it raises a dangerous question. How do projects with unlimited funding, top experts, and global attention still collapse? Why do governments and billion-dollar companies keep making the same mistakes? And more importantly, who actually pays the price when they fail? Because someone always does. Let's start with cities. Not towns, not neighborhoods, entire cities. Built for millions of people. With highways, skyscrapers, shopping malls, and public transit. Everything ready, everything finished. Except for one thing: people. In places like Ordos in China, entire urban landscapes were constructed almost overnight. Towering apartment buildings, perfectly paved roads, state-of-the-art infrastructure. But when the construction ended, nobody came. The streets stayed empty. The buildings stayed silent. And what was supposed to be a thriving city became a ghost. But this wasn't a mistake in construction. It was a mistake in assumption. Developers believed demand would keep growing forever. They assumed people would eventually move in. They planned for a future that never arrived. And when reality didn't match the projection, the entire system collapsed under its own expectations. Because building a city is easy. Filling it is not. But physical structures aren't the only things that fail. Sometimes the biggest collapses are invisible. Not made of concrete, but of promises. In Silicon Valley, failure doesn't look like abandoned buildings. It looks like headlines. One of the most famous examples was a company that promised to revolutionize medicine. Theranos, a startup that claimed it could run hundreds of blood tests from a single drop. It attracted billions in investment, powerful board members, global attention. It was valued at over $9 billion. There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. Behind the scenes, results were inaccurate. Processes were hidden, and the entire company was built on an illusion. When the truth came out, the company collapsed. Investors lost money. Employees lost jobs. But the story didn't end there. Because failure at that level doesn't just disappear. It leaves a mark. And Theranos wasn't alone. Another company, WeWork, promised to redefine the future of work. Shared office spaces. A new way to build community. A vision of global expansion. Investors poured in billions. The company grew rapidly. Offices everywhere. Valuation soaring. At one point, it was worth nearly $50 billion. But underneath the growth, there was a problem. The business model didn't work. The company was spending far more than it was earning. Growth was prioritized over profit. Hype over sustainability. And when investors finally looked closer, everything changed. The valuation collapsed. Billions disappeared. And once again, the people at the top walked away far less damaged than the system itself, which leads to something even more dangerous. Failures that don't just cost money, but lives. Massive infrastructure projects. Airports, bridges, public systems. These are supposed to be the most carefully planned projects in the world. Built by experts, reviewed by engineers, funded by governments. And yet, they still fail. Some airports take decades longer than expected. Budgets multiply several times over. A project estimated at $5 billion suddenly costs $15, then $20, then more. Why? Because large projects have a unique problem. They're too big to stop. Once billions are invested, admitting failure becomes almost impossible. So instead of stopping, they continue. More funding, more delays, more complexity. Until the project becomes something entirely different from what was originally planned. And sometimes, the consequences are worse than financial. Bridges collapse, systems fail, and lives are lost, all because early warning signs were ignored. Or because stopping the project would have been politically or financially inconvenient, and that reveals the pattern behind almost every major failure. It doesn't start with incompetence. It starts with confidence, overconfidence, the belief that everything will go according to plan, that projections are accurate, that growth will continue, that nothing will go wrong. Then comes overpromising. Bigger visions, more ambitious goals, higher expectations, followed by overspending. More money poured in to keep the vision alive, to avoid admitting mistakes, to maintain the illusion of success, and eventually collapse. Because reality always catches up, and when it does, the consequences are massive. But here's the part most people don't see. The system behind these failures. In many cases, the people making the biggest decisions aren't the ones facing the biggest risks. Executives can leave, founders can step down, politicians can move on. But the costs don't disappear. They shift to investors, to employees, to taxpayers, to the public, which creates a dangerous imbalance. Decisions are made at the top, but the consequences are felt at the bottom. And because of that, the cycle repeats. Again, and again, and again. Because if the people making the decisions don't fully bear the consequences, there's less incentive to avoid failure, especially when success brings massive rewards, and failure doesn't bring equal punishment. So the system continues. New projects, new promises, new billions invested, all built on the same foundations: optimism, pressure, and the belief that this time it will be different. But history suggests otherwise, because these failures aren't rare. They're not unpredictable. They follow a pattern, and they're still happening today. Every delayed project, every overhyped startup, every empty building, every budget that quietly doubles. Someone is paying for it, even if you don't see it. Even if it's spread across millions of people. Even if it's hidden in taxes, prices, or lost opportunities. Because in the end, failure at this scale is never free. It's just redistributed. And that leads to one final question. The next time you hear about the next big thing, a revolutionary company, a massive new project, a bold vision for the future, ask yourself this: is it innovation, or is it the beginning of the next billion-dollar mistake?